In this video, we're looking at Unit 3, the cell. 3.1, Foundations in Cell Biology. We're starting a new unit. Let's talk about it. So what is a cell? Cells are the smallest unit of life in living things. We've talked about cells quite a bit. And so, or you could say basic unit of life. There's lots of ways of saying this. Cells are basically the smallest thing that's considered living. Some things are one cells. Some things are lots of cells. Speaking of lots of cells, this man saw lots of cells. And so if you're in my class and you're watching these videos, as far as these people are concerned, you need to know their last names and what they did. May talk about their history or different things in class, but as far as I'm concerned for the class, last name, what they did. Robert Hooke, he is credited with the first one to see cells. He saw cells in plant cork, and he thought they looked like tiny little cells, like a prison cell or something. And the word stuck, so he coined the name cell. And it's been around ever since. I believe Robert Hooke found out cells in around the 1600s. And so, yeah, here we go. Anton von Leeuwenhoek is known for being the first one to see living cells. So I think he saw some cells in some like pond water. And notice that he also saw human blood cells, first ones to see those. And so these are living cells. And noted that, and so he's credited with being the first person to see living cells. Him and Robert Hooke are sometimes mentioned together, first people to see cells. Here we go. Matthias Schleiden on the right and Theodor Swan on the left are noted with a couple of groundbreaking kinds of discoveries as well. They studied all living things, essentially. In those days, there were two categories for living things, plants and animals. And it was Matthias Schleiden, however you pronounce it, who was the first person to say that all plants are composed of cells. And then Theodor Swan, not to be outmatched, said that all animals are made out of cells. Always seen these two guys together as far as their names, Schleiden, Swan. That's how I remembered them. And so, the way I remember this is a swan is an animal. There you go. And Rudolf Virchow, not to be left out, he made the claim that all cells come from pre-existing cells, which that is true. And so, as opposed to just kind of spontaneously happening, like, spontaneous generation or something like that, which we'll talk about in a later unit. And so all these people came together, not necessarily all at the same time. They didn't all live at the same time, but they gathered all these thoughts together, right? We talked about an explanation that unifies a broad range of observations in another unit. Well, it's a theory, so they have a theory. It's called the cell theory. It's not a guess. It's an explanation that brings together all this different stuff. The cell theory is composed of three main ideas: that all living things are composed of cells. Thanks, Schleiden and Swan. Of course, now we divide things into other things besides just animals and plants. But you get the idea. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function, meaning that cells are the smallest thing that is considered living, and cells can independently operate from other living things. I think it's important to structure and function. Some organisms are just single-celled organisms, and so that's important. And all cells come from pre-existing cells. In order to be a cell, you have to have been born from a cell. Here's an interesting picture. All cells have these three characteristics: DNA, a cell membrane, and cytoplasm. This is something that unifies all living things, or these three things. Now, there are some cells that are like, well, what about red blood cells? They don't have a nucleus. Well, they don't. But they did. They just don't. And so all cells have these three things. You could probably lump ribosomes in there, but I'm not entirely sure. Honestly, we're just going to stick with three because groups of three are really helpful. We've got lots of groups of three today. And so that's all living things are composed of cells, and every cell in all living things has at least those three things. Here's two kinds of cells: prokaryotes and eukaryotes. What do they have? Well, let's talk about them separately. The word prokaryote literally means before nucleus. And so these are organisms that came around before the nucleus did, and so they don't have one. So their main characteristics is they have no nucleus. They have no membrane-bound organelles. The only organelle of note that they have are ribosomes. Other than that, they have nothing like that. And they have DNA, right? Because we talked about that. They have a cell membrane, they have DNA, they have cytoplasm. They just don't have a nucleus to put it in, right? And so no membrane-bound organelles, no nucleus, and the third characteristic is that they have a single circular chromosome as opposed to what eukaryotic cells have, a single circular chromosome. When we get to the other units with like DNA, we'll talk about some other DNA that prokaryote cells have, but for today we're keeping it simple. Eukaryotic cells are the opposite. The word eukaryote means true nucleus, and so they have a true nucleus. So that's the first thing. They have a nucleus. They have membrane-bound organelles, things like mitochondria, chloroplasts, lysosomes, all the fun things we're getting ready to talk about. And they have multiple linear chromosomes as opposed to single circular, multiple linear chromosomes. Some things have just a couple chromosomes. Some things have a lot more than that. So we have 23 pairs of chromosomes in our cells, or 46 chromosomes. And then lastly, let's talk about the difference between animal cells and plant cells. We're keeping it general here, and this list could probably be different here depending on who was doing it. But for my purposes, we're going to list 3 for each one. Animal cells, unique characteristics. They have these organelles called centrioles. Centrioles are important for cell division. We'll talk more about that in 3.5. They have cilia and flagella. This picture shows cilia and flagella. You could throw that in there. Basically, we're going to talk about that when we get to 3.3. Just guessing. I think that's right. 3.3 is when we'll talk about cilia and flagella. And they have lysosomes. I think we talk about that in 3.3 as well. Now, you will, if you look it up, do plant cells have lysosomes? There's going to be some things that say yes, some things say no. Plant cells generally use their vacuoles as lysosomes. They still have that same function, but they don't have a dedicated lysosome. And so there's going to be some debate there maybe. But for my purposes, for my class, lysosomes are something that animal cells have that plant cells do not. What do plant cells have that animal cells do not? Namely, a cell wall. They have other things have cell walls. Bacteria, fungi have cell walls, but animal cells do not. Plant cells do. Chloroplasts, these are the things that do photosynthesis. And then lastly, plant cells have a large central vacuole. Some animal cells have vacuoles, but plant cells have a large central vacuole that distinguishes them. Now, one thing I want to make note before I end this video, and this is important. A lot of times students will hear plants have chloroplasts, and so then they'll kind of go the other side of that and they'll say, well, animal cells have mitochondria, and they kind of make those mutually exclusive groups. And that's not true. Animal cells also have mitochondria. So this is important. Our plant cells also have mitochondria. Plant cells have mitochondria and chloroplasts, whereas animal cells just simply have mitochondria